Minister of Transport and Mining, Audley Shaw, as well as Xavier Main, who is State Minister in the Ministry of National Security, and other support staff from the Army, as well as the Office of the Prime Minister. We will get the ball rolling quickly, and we start with a presentation by Prime Minister Andrew Holness. Prime Minister, sir.
Thank you, Minister Morgan. Let me join in saying welcome to the OPM press room. It is our actual first live presentation since this press room was inaugurated. It's very good to see journalists in the physical presence. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Jamaica. Persons listening overseas on social media. This morning, His Excellency, the Governor General, the Most Honorable Sir Patrick Allen, declared a state of public emergency in the parishes of Clarendon, St. Catherine, and specified areas in the parishes of Kingston and St. Andrew, and a state of public emergency as well in the parishes of St. James, Westmoreland, and Hanover. So there are two separate declarations of states of public emergency. One we consider to be the Southern Crescent, and the other the Western Tri-Parishes. The Commissioner of Police and the Chief of Defence Staff will give details on these declarations. The government, after careful consideration on the advice of the security chiefs, decided to advise the Governor General that it was necessary and indeed appropriate to declare states of public emergency in these areas. We have seen an increase in criminal activities in these areas, and indeed a threat to property and, in some instances, public disorder. It is important to note that we are also approaching the Christmas season, and this will require the deployment of even greater resources, sometimes resources that our security forces do not have. And therefore, the government has to act in a preemptive way. The government has to act in such a way as to maximize the resources that we have to save lives and property from the threats that exist. The underlying threats are such that it will cause an increase in the number of murders and homicides that we see going into the next few weeks. And indeed, we have seen an increase in murders over the last 6 months. What we are seeing with gang activities in these areas is cause for grave concern. Indeed, I have been appealed to by several members of Parliament, including from the opposition, asking for great assistance in their constituencies as a result of the increased levels of crime and violence. So we are expecting that there will be support for the declaration of this state of public emergency. And we are indeed hoping that the opposition will offer their critical support as well. So with those words, I will now turn over to the Chief of Police, the Commissioner of Police. I'm giving you the American terminology, the Commissioner, to give further details on the state of public emergency. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, ministers, other officials, CDS, members of the media, good morning. So we have seen high levels of violence over the past, probably, as the Prime Minister said, 6 months. So as at November the 13th, it was Sunday, we had had a total of 1,360 murders in Jamaica. It's really, at that point, an increase of 6.8% over last year. And of that figure, collectively, 10 of the 19 police divisions in that area that the Prime Minister described account for 72% of murders that have happened and 75% of shootings. The main drivers of these violent crimes continue to be gang violence, which accounts for 71% of all murders, and interpersonal conflicts, which account for another 16% of these murders. Since my press conference in February this year, I had indicated that we'd be targeting guns, gangs, and gunmen, who are the chief architects of the sort of violence that we are seeing in the society. We have reaped some successes. We've removed 675 illegal firearms, which is up 10% on last year, from the hands of criminals. We've disrupted gun runners and contract killers on their way to carry out their profession, if you can call it that. And these successes have come from the way we've been executing in conjunction with our security force partners, the JDF and others, detailed policing and security plans. We have increased intelligence, and we've applied better technology to what we've been doing. Now, this is a work in progress. We aren't there yet with all that we want to put in place. And even with the strides we have made, the willingness of armed criminals to kill, the murder for hire, and an increasing level of callousness has kept our murder rate at unacceptably high levels. We'll see the impact of the new Firearms Act over time. I don't doubt going into next year. We're in that amnesty period now, having the new act in place at the 1st of November. And so this act we see as having a significant impact on those people in the whole illegal firearm ecosystem, whether they are the actual shooters and users of firearms, or they are the purveyors of them who support that illegal industry. In September, we launched Operation Relentless 2, which placed strategic focus on 5 specific police divisions. We jointly planned operations and set up joint operations centers to focus on some key flashpoints. Those are 5 specific divisions: St. James, Westmoreland, St. Andrews South, St. Catherine North and South. Now, these operations under Relentless have started the process of giving us some reductions. But these gains are not happening fast enough, and they're not substantial enough based on what is happening in the country and based on the risk and the number of our people who are being killed. Now, although we tend to speak about gains and losses when we're talking about statistics of persons who have been killed, what we're actually speaking about are people's lives. Jamaicans who have fallen victims, not to crime, but to criminals. Actually, people who go out there and their position in life is that they're going to kill and maim people in communities and create as much fear as possible for profit and for some benefit that they seek to have from their activities. These are persons who know and understand the system and how to present themselves as victims when confronted by the law. They're duping well-meaning persons in the society into believing that they are other than they are. That's heartless killers preying upon weak and vulnerable people in communities. Now, no one knows this better than us at the police, as we see every one of those murdered persons where they fell. We deploy our first responders, our detectives, our crime scene personnel, and victim support personnel in the communities, and we share their pain. There is an urgency to what we do as a society, and it's on this basis that there is no place for reticence in using every tool that is available to us collectively in order to deal with this situation. It's how we're going to staunch the bloodletting, and it's against this backdrop that in consultation with the CDS, we have requested the use of emergency powers under a limited state of emergency in the named parishes and divisions. In previous states of emergencies, in the mentioned parishes that we'll be covering, we have seen significant declines in murders and shootings when we put the measures in place. If we can just remind people that when we first brought it in, we had a 70% reduction in murders in St. James, a 61% reduction in St. Catherine, and overall an average in all areas, divisions that we use these measures, an average of 40% reduction. We are seeking similar reductions as we go into the end of the year and into next year. And this 40% translates to a lot of lives, a lot of our citizens, a lot of people. The communities with the greatest exposure to violence have repeatedly asked for these measures. They understand the qualitative difference when the criminals are not in their midst. So even if the criminals are not shooting, once they are there in the community, they create fear in the community. This is a measure to keep communities safe and to give them a break from people who they know, and they have been supporting us along with our other intelligence gathering mechanisms to identify the persons who are creating these problems. It's not all the time that we'll have the evidence up front to be able to deal with them, but we'll usually have strong intelligence on the matter. It'll also give us some enhanced powers of search, which we'll use, and greater flexibility in the use of our human resources. As we push into the final weeks of the year, we're mindful, as the Prime Minister indicated, of our public order and traffic management responsibilities, and we have to do both. We have to balance both. But ultimately, we have to be concerned and ready to deal with this matter of violence, and we'll continue to do so with the powers. Without the powers, we will continue to do as best we can, but I can tell you that with the powers, we'll have a greater effect on what we're trying to get done. We always ask for the public's assistance when we're carrying out these measures, and the public support for what we're doing. At some times, it may be a little inconvenient, but largely, I believe that we have been building bridges with our public and our communities, and we have an understanding that the JCF and our partners, the JDF, are here to support what we're trying to get done. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I now invite the Chief of Defence Staff to give details of the boundaries and other aspects of the emergency measures. CDS.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Ministers of government, members of the press, citizens of Jamaica, good morning. The Jamaica Defence Force, as part of the Joint Security Force apparatus, supports the recommendation for the declaration of the states of public emergency across the parishes of Westmoreland, Hanover, St. James, Clarendon, St. Catherine, Kingston, and sections of St. Andrew. Through our analysis and intelligence gathering, we continue to recognize the influence of gangs as a primary contributor to violence with illegal weapons and ammunition, and their criminal and violent actions continue to be by the ill-gotten gains of extortion, contract killings, lottery scamming, and other forms of criminality. These gangs are continuously engaged in intense intra- and inter-gang conflicts, which are a leading cause of high levels of murders and shootings across the country. These gangsters are determined to destroy our country and potential for growth and development. Following the Prime Minister's decision to accept the recommendation for imposition of states of public emergency, it's my duty to inform you that the areas under the state of public emergency shall consist of the entire area of land comprising the parishes of Westmoreland, Hanover, St. James, Clarendon, and St. Catherine within the established parish boundaries, as well as all the police divisions in Kingston and St. Andrew, except for St. Andrew Central and St. Andrew North. The borders for all the states of public emergencies have been published and can be seen on the screen. As always, we acknowledge that persons may be concerned about the implications of internal security operations under the state of public emergency. The law-abiding citizens need not fear the security forces. This SOE is for you. It will ease the burden of criminality in your community. Further, we want to assure citizens that both the JDF and the JCF are adequately trained and oriented to protect the human rights of all Jamaicans. Citizens will encounter various increased operational activities, including but not limited to vehicle checkpoints, mobile patrols, and curfews. These operational activities are not aimed at inconveniencing you, but rather to assist in ridding your communities of criminal elements. Therefore, we ask you, those who live and work in the areas or travel through them, to be mindful and cooperative with the members of the security forces on the ground. I take this time to also ask all citizens, not just those who live in the areas under the now declared SOE, to see these enhanced security measures as an opportunity to join the fight. Guns, gunmen, and gangs are eroding peace in the society, and the fight against criminality should not solely be left to the security forces, but rather a unified effort. You are in the communities, you are witnessing the occurrences, and only through your support will we be able to arrest the situation. Only when citizens share the information and fully participate can we curb the violence in our nation. You can do so by using the JDF tip line at 876-837-8888 or the JCF tip line at 311. In closing, let me affirm that the JDF is committed to its support to the JCF in securing and safeguarding Jamaica and Jamaicans. Thank you.
Thank you, CDS. I will now invite the Minister of National Security to make his remarks.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Commissioner of Police, Major General Anthony Anderson, Chief of Staff, Rear Admiral Williams Gorman, Minister of Government, members of the media, present Jamaicans listening in at home and abroad. The changing nature of gang conflict in the last 6 months have seen increased number of what we term drive-by shootings, resulting in significant injury and even death to innocent bystanders. This, of course, leads to increased fear in our communities by law-abiding citizens. The random nature of these things and the brazen activity of the criminals, which could be seen as a response to increased dynamic activity of security forces. So they move fast, shoot and run, and therefore less accurately, of course, creating a sense of fear and injuring and hurting our innocent law-abiding citizens. The nature of this activity demands extraordinary measures to protect the lives of our citizens and restore a level of order within our communities. And the advice, of course, the Chief of the Commissioner of Police and the Chief of Staff, the Government General has accepted the declaration of a state of public emergency in the areas outlined by the Chief of Staff. The coming into being of the Firearms Act has given the police an additional tool that will be very effective in removing from the community several serious criminal elements who have been acting with impunity for some time. We urge citizens to cooperate with the police in their efforts, the security forces, in their efforts to apprehend these criminals and rid the community of this kind of criminality. It is of paramount importance that we reduce the number of guns in the communities while we pursue relentlessly the criminal actors and seek to apprehend them and remove them from the community at this point in time. And a very important season for Jamaicans as we approach the season of goodwill. We will look for the guns. We have offered an amnesty. We have seen a few coming in, those in fact that we actually anticipated, guns that were at home and have not been licensed for some time. The criminals have yet to respond in significant numbers, but we'll be looking for them in every corner, in particular in these 10 police divisions we have identified. It's the weapon of choice in inspiring fear and killing Jamaican citizens. We will pursue them and hunt them and apprehend them. The government is committed to utilizing all available tools in our pursuit of disrupting gangs, locking away the dons, and the criminal elements that seek to inspire fear and disrupt the peace and good order for society. The state of public emergency is designed to provide the security forces in times like these with the most effective tool to disrupt the highly resourced, organized, and brutal gangs who are moving as if they are free to move around. They move brazenly and with impunity. We will stop this. The state of public emergency will restore order, and it is in the interest of our citizens. We seek to protect lives and ensure that Jamaicans can move around in this season safely and with a high level of comfort as they seek to enjoy the holiday season that so many Jamaicans look towards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chan. First, I want to apologize to members of the media. We were a bit late this morning, not characteristic of us in recent times. We had actually sent you an advisory, but we had a meeting to discuss these matters before, so we made a little error in sending out the advisory. So we want to apologize to you and the viewers who are waiting. We will now be taking questions. We're offering one question and a follow-up to each member of the media, as the Prime Minister has another function he has to attend. So please identify yourself and your media house and then ask your question, and we will answer. May we begin? Mr. Arthur Hall.
It's a very good question, and thanks for asking. Firstly, any impact on disrupting gangs, taking guns out of the hands of gunmen and criminals, any impact on disrupting criminal networks, any impact on diverting young people from crime and deviant action will not only have an immediate impact during the period of the establishment of the state of public emergency, but it will have a long-lasting impact relative to the length of the initial emergency actions that were implemented. So we expect, as we have seen, that once we have implemented a state of public emergency, there is a residual effect. So we expect that even for 14 days, we will have an impact on murder rates, a positive impact on public order, and a positive impact on the recovery of guns, and a positive impact on the reduction of shootings, and a general improvement of the security circumstances heading into the Christmas season. I said, we are hopeful and we expect that the opposition, like every other Jamaican who sees the problem of crime and violence, will make a thoughtful decision to support these actions.
Just a quick follow-up, Mr. Prime Minister. I you may take it to the lower house today. And have you spoken yet to the opposition counterpart, the opposition leader or the opposition spokesperson on national security?
Well, the Attorney General is here, and other persons who are more knowledgeable on the constitutional arrangements for states of public emergency. But as of the declaration of His Excellency the Governor General, the state of emergency is in effect. 7 days following the declaration, we will table in Parliament the regulations. But the regulations are already in effect and will be available for people to scrutinize. I have spoken informally to the leader of the opposition, and we have had outreach to other members in the opposition. Bear in mind what I have said, that I have been petitioned is a strong word, appealed to put some action in place, both by members on my side of the government and members opposite. And indeed, some have expressed the view that the situation warrants a state of public emergency, because there are areas which were, for a year or so, without problems. And then they have seen new gang activities emerging, sometimes gang activities that are not initiated here in Jamaica, but initiated overseas, that have caused a disruptive effect on communities. And they are concerned. I think they have to resolve, when I say they, the members opposite us in Parliament, have to resolve the protection of the lives of citizens over their political positions that they have expressed.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We will now take another question. I think that's Edmund from the Gleaner.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Question to Dr. Chang. Earlier this year, I think it was in February, sir, you spoke in Parliament and you mentioned the impact that illicit money coming into the country was having on the economy, the society as a whole. But in particular, you pointed to the construction sector, where you said that ill-gotten gain is being used. And you also mentioned that 3 agencies, and law enforcement agency, MOCA, CTOC, and the Financial Investigation Division, have been conducting investigations. You said you were expecting some positive results this year. Can you give us an update on that as to what is happening? And just to ask a question in relation to the SOEs, you mentioned earlier that that is Ms. Weems Gorman, that you will ensure the human rights of Jamaicans. Can you just elaborate on that a little more and give us even greater assurance? Because we've seen in the past where situations have arisen where complaints have been made and action has been taken against the state. Could you just give us some more assurances as to how this will be guaranteed? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, not direct to SOE, but yes, the agents of government indicated have been working at not only apprehending, but in fact seeking to forfeit a certain amount of the ill-gotten gains of major criminals in Jamaica. I think at this point in time, the government of Jamaica, through the Financial Investigation Division, therefore the Ministry of Finance, is in the possession of well over $2 billion worth of real estate. There have been 2 significant cases in newspaper recently reflecting the work of the security forces. The cases, by their very nature, takes time, and that's what the public have to understand. Bear in mind, now you are hitting criminals with significant levels of resources. They hire the best King's Counsel to defend them and to challenge the legislation along. So what is happening now is not only execution of the implementation of the legislation, but also setting the kind of precedents that our court demands. And therefore, you go through significant, lengthy trials. But it's progressing. We have, in fact, acquired, as I said, a significant amount of property. I don't have a figure on the cash that has been recovered, but that also has been significant. And that work continues because in the medium term, the disruption, apprehension, and removal from society of the criminal organizers, they are the ones who do damage even more than the young men who they hired to pull the trigger. Fear is inspired by those who pull the trigger, and the police will track them down and apprehend them and detain them. But we have to maintain vigilance and find the resources and time to remove from society the organizers, the ones who sell the drugs, buy the guns, and distribute them and influence to our young people, young and vulnerable Jamaicans. So that work continues and will intensify as we go along. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, sir. In respect of states of public emergencies, I think my assurance could be that since we have been declaring or using this tool, that there are no cases that security forces have abused the human rights of any Jamaicans under the SOE. My assurance, further assurance, is that once we put new persons into the fight, we ensure that they are exposed and trained appropriately before they're deployed.
Thank you very much, Rear Admiral. We have another question. Is that Nika? Nika Lewis. Could you remind me of your media host, please? CVM Television. Thank you, Nika. Yes, we're hearing you. We're hearing you.
Okay. So my question is directed at either, I don't know, it's regarding personnel in the JCF and particularly the issues that we've been having in recent times where we've talked about why we can't have more ZOSOs was because we don't have sufficient personnel and resources. So how are we making way for this or these SOEs across several large parishes? And the follow-up, I gather, after that response.
Thank you. Rear Admiral. Commissioner. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, Nico. All right. So the way a zone of special operations is prosecuted, the legislation that allows us to do some things when we have a flare-up. If you notice, all the zones are very small areas because they require heavy deployments, very heavy deployments that prevent violence from taking place in that space. It's a disproportionate amount of deployment and therefore obviously could not be expanded in a much wider way. What it doesn't do is that it does not require the persons who are committing the violence in the community to leave. What it does is prevent them from carrying out the actions within that space. Let me make it a little, let me explain that a little more. So you'll generally find that the guys who are doing the violence within the community, sometimes they, of course, do it outside of the community as well. When you have a zone in place, you'll see violence drop in the community, but they may still be there. We see that when we do surveys of communities, and the fear still remains in the community, even though the violence is not taking place, because the fear is associated with those people being there and not necessarily with the actual shooting that may be taking place. So the zone works in terms of suppressing, but the people will still be there. With the state of public emergency, it allows us to separate those people from the community. It's very much targeted at the people who are causing the problem. And the reason why we do an entire parish or space is to stop them from just moving up the road and doing that. We see that in zones sometimes, where just outside of the zone, we see the conflict start to play out there. What we try to do is separate those persons who wish to kill and harm from the people they wish to do it to. It also, once removed from the community, the citizens are in a much better position to engage us. They can, as long as those guys are there, they're limited in the engagement they can do. And so that's difference. The state of emergency, even though you see it spread out, you may see a checkpoint here and all that. That's just the visible part of it. A lot of dynamic things happen in the space to cause the drops that we've gotten. The details, the very nitty-gritty tactical details, of course, we can't really share. But that's why it repeatedly has that impact on what we do. I must make the point as well that all other policing activities take place anyway. It doesn't stop anything. It's in addition to everything else that we do. There is no abandonment of any police tactics that we may have in our arsenal.
And that's perfect, Commissioner, because it leads me right to the second section of my question regarding the current gun amnesty and continued protests across the island. How will we be dealing with those amidst this SOE?
I will ask Dr. Chang to speak about the gun amnesty, as it is resident in his ministry. Dr. Chang.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. The gun amnesty is designed, as I said, for 2 weeks. There are two intentions. One was to give some of those with illegal firearms an opportunity to hand them over and start over, give them a chance to pursue a legitimate life of production activity, and we'd provide the opportunity for that. But principally, too, we wanted the new Firearms Act introduced very severe penalties for the possession of an illegal firearm. It's the intention and policy of the government to use to remove such dangerous weapons from the community. So there are many individuals in Jamaica who might have inherited a firearm from their grandfather, their father, or they might have acquired by some other means, usually by legacy, or they might have just got old, not liked the firearm for several years. We did not want any of those categories to get caught in the net that we're putting out there for illegal firearms. And we have seen a number of them coming in. I think so far we have gone well over 20 large individuals who had firearms locked away in the safe. I think there's in the news one lady who had one for some 20+ years from her husband. She had never licensed it. There's a gentleman in Montego Bay too. He just said, I'm getting old. He had not liked this firearm. They sent them in. That kind of firearm has been coming in, and I'm satisfied with that because we do not wish for any of those individuals to be caught in the new net we're setting out there for illegal firearms. And indeed, in the nature of a society, if we arrest one such individual, as happened in the first dispensation of the Gun Court Act, it brings a pale of negativity towards the Firearms Act. But the Firearms Act is a piece of legislation the government wanted. It took some time to prepare, to get it right, to ensure we satisfied all the legal precedents and constitutional framework that is required. And we now have a very strong piece of legislation, and it will impose significant penalties. Intention is, if you conduct criminal activity with a firearm, we are intent to remove it from society for life. Makes it easier for the police not to keep picking up the same person over and over, and it makes the community safer. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Commissioner. I just wanted to add to what the Commissioner and Minister has said. Right across the region, in particular along the Caribbean basin, societies like Jamaica are experiencing a persistent increase in homicides, shootings, and other dangerous crimes. It is not a situation unique to Jamaica. Indeed, I visited Trinidad a few months ago, and they too are experiencing a similar situation. There are many reasons for this, and the criminologists and sociologists and other professionals have pointed to the growing entrenchment of gangs and gang culture in the society. They have also pointed to the ease of access to firearms, and they have also pointed to the parallel trade in narcotics with firearms. Jamaica is experiencing all of these. It is not a problem that has existed for 5 years, for a decade, for 20 years. We have been experiencing this problem for over 40 years. What has changed is that the gangs have morphed into intelligent organizations, meaning that they are scoping the environment. They are paying attention to the strategies of the police force. They are consolidating information to make decisions. And they are hierarchical. They have networks. they have leadership. They have deliberate recruiting mechanisms. They have deliberate trade mechanisms. They have deliberate mechanisms to launder their ill-gotten gains and to establish legitimate operations. And they have deliberate strategies to infiltrate public entities and public officers, to corrupt them, to facilitate their illicit activities. And the gangs are supported by what you could call auxiliary services, hitmen, guns for hire, people who hide guns for them. They capture entire communities, and they are the root cause of conflicts in the country. As far back as 2016, when I took over the administration of the country, we recognized that this was the problem, and we set about in a systematic way to address this problem in such a way that would preserve life, both the lives of innocent citizens and the life of the criminal as well. We first developed a new legislation called the Zone of Special Operations. That legislation was designed to support peacekeeping operations in communities in conflict. It was a resource-intense strategy. We identified the top 20 conflict-torn communities defined as having an increasing number of murders and a number of murders over and above the average in the country. It requires significant static policing or policing that requires heavy presence. So you would see upon entering a zone, depending on the phase that that zone is in, you would see checkpoints, you would see patrols. But that is also supported by a social intervention strategy. So I want the country to understand that we have had significant impact using the zones of special operations. In fact, all the communities in which we have declared zones of special operations, all of them have seen significant reductions. The people there are happy, they are satisfied. We have seen one community that has been expressing signs of fatigue, and that we have taken note of. And I've been in discussions with the Chief of Defense Staff and the Commissioner of Police about restructuring that zone so that the citizens there do not feel overwhelmed by the security presence. But in general, this piece of legislation is a model as to how we can bring peace into war-torn communities in Jamaica. And it has worked. If you go to any of the zones, the people will tell you. Once we say we're going to pull down the zone of special operations, the people say, no, absolutely not. And it has been designed to be a long-term intervention until peace is a natural feature of those communities. We then decided to pursue the use of emergency powers. Those powers are in our Constitution, and the conditions for their use are specified. And we have, noting our history, noting the fear that people have of states of public emergency, and the potential that it has for creating any environment for the violation of rights, we have been very careful in training our security forces. We have been very careful in ensuring that we deploy it in areas where we can manage, that we don't stretch ourselves too thinly, and then we have problems as a result of administration or lack of deployment. So we have been very careful in implementing the states of public emergency. Indeed, the statistics will show that the security forces, I doubt, have killed anyone in an area using powers under the state of public emergency. In fact, the state of public emergency gives the security forces the overwhelming force, the overwhelming organized use of force, so that they don't have to act in a violent way, so that they don't have to act in a way in the use of force that ends up in the loss of life. So the security force, the emergency powers give the security forces these kinds of power, these kinds of advantages, these opportunities to use force without the force ending up being violent. And you can check it. You can check what I've said. Now, it doesn't mean, as the commissioner pointed out, that normal law enforcement is not used in areas where SOEs are declared. The police would go about their normal business. But the police now have greater tools, firstly, in how they can multiply their force by the incorporation of the Army. And secondly, the Army can expand the force by adding what I would like to call additional independent leadership. So by having the Army working in coordination with the police, the establishment of a joint command, but the Army is able to operate in certain circumstances independently of the police. So the workload is better shared and managed, and which is why we have the greater impact on crime. The second power that it gives is the ability to detain. And this area has been an area of contention with the opposition. But it has been effective. And in this SOE, we are now looking to strengthen the powers for search, because we need to take this opportunity to find and disarm gunmen of their weapons. So the state of public emergency gives our security forces greater strategic power over the use of their resources. So not only can we do static operations, as we do in the zones of special operations, which are intensive to have soldiers and policemen stationed at one place, ensuring that a gunman over here doesn't shoot at innocent civilians over here. We now have the ability to operate dynamically. That is, to take intelligence and pursue persons who are criminally inclined, persons who would have the power to intimidate witnesses if they were apprehended or brought before the courts, persons who have the power to create terror in a community and create the space for criminal activity. We would now, under the SOE, have the ability to hold on to such persons. But this is not arbitrary. And I think this has to be stressed. This government does not believe in the arbitrary use of power. States of public emergency before, particularly those in the 70s, had a high level of arbitrary use of power that was not subject to oversight. And so we have crafted the use of these powers in such a way as to ensure that ultimately we can say we have protected the life and the other rights of our citizens. And that's very important to note. So I just thought I would give this clarification so that the public can understand what it is that we...
Thank you very much. I think, Nika, your question intimated the impact on the amnesty of the SOE. I think Commissioner of Police can clarify that one.
On the amnesty, or it was on the amnesty?
Well, Will the SOEs impact the amnesty?
Well, remember, so the amnesty doesn't stop you from being charged for a firearm. No, what it does is allow you to carry it in. In other words, if you're involved in a crime at the moment with a firearm, you have no amnesty. Right? Yeah, that's it. We're going to arrest you and we're going to charge you. If you're on your way to do a criminal activity or in the process of doing that, that's not what the amnesty is geared towards. What amnesty is for people who have firearms and wish them to turn them over to the state and to us, to the police, to FLA, wherever you're going to turn it over to. You can do it without us pursuing any charges against you. And there's a mechanism for that. So that's what it is. So
CP, that
yes,
includes criminals as well.
that includes criminals.
If someone who is a criminal wants to turn over their
Right.
change
So
their
if they
life,
have a
turn a new leaf, the
absolutely.
amnesty provides that
If
opportunity.
you have a change of heart and you don't want to pursue that life anymore, well, good. Until the 19th. On the 20th, it's a different business.
Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Okay.
We have space for two more. Ricardo Brooks, Nationwide.
Good morning. The question is to the Commissioner. The Prime Minister says the government does not believe in the arbitrary use of force. Does that mean you've already done the necessary intelligence gathering and you know exactly who you're going into these parishes and communities to detain? And I'll just go ahead and ask the follow-up question. The follow-up question is to the Chief of Defense Staff. A member of the JDF has been accused of sexual misconduct, and reports indicate that he has since returned to the island. Can you give us an update as to where you are with that investigation? Thank you.
Commissioner.
Right. So the intelligence packages, we've had them, we've been through them again. We actually created a number of packages, about 300 of them, going into Operation Relentless. We still have those packages and some others. Every division, as part of their divisional policing plan, will have the package of persons who are creating problems in their divisional space. Now, there are two sets of persons. There are those who are wanted or persons of interest in a matter. There's some sort of statement, there's some evidence, something's on a file. There are another set of people who are actually doing killings as well, who have not made those mistakes as yet. They will. But they're out there killing or influencing killings because they're not pulling a trigger themselves. But we know who they are, and we have intelligence packages on them. Under the emergency powers, both of those sets are vulnerable, and yes, we do have significant intelligence packages. Now, it doesn't mean that those are the only persons who may be detained, depending on somebody's direct actions or whatever happens on the ground. There may be a few others. But when we actually had a similar set of state of emergency, I think it was in 2019 that we had this kind of set of state of emergencies, only 10% or 12% of our entire lockup population were detainees. The rest in our custody were under normal charges. So it was never the preponderance of people who are detainees at all. They're very specific, and it's cause and effect. When those guys are in custody, murders drop. When they go back out, they continue to do it. We're still obviously pursuing every other mechanism at the same time.
Mr. Brooks, thank you for the question. In respect of that matter, it remains under investigation, and so I would refrain from giving any further details at this time.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Thank you, CDS. We have time for one last question. General Perseus, Television Jamaica.
Thank you so much, Robert. Commissioner, I'm going to do your checklist. Suppressing violence, check. Separating the criminals from the community, check. But the conviction rate I put to you is poor. What is being done to improve the investigative capacity of the police? That's one. And two, I don't know if Dr. Chang can talk to us about fixing the glitches in the system, the traffic ticketing system. There seems to be some disconnect with the tax office's system versus the police's system. Who wants to take it first?
I'll take it first. Okay. So the conviction rate, if you're talking about for homicides, for those cases that go to court, I think the last I heard from the DPP, it's at 67 to 70%, which actually is not that low. I think it's perhaps when we look at the number of homicides in the country or murders, and you're talking about clear-up rates and that sort of thing, it's a different thing. Is that what you were referring to? So we clear up a particular number of homicides based on our capacity. And that is a sheer resource issue, how many detectives you have, how much access to the various supporting things they have. Our clear-up rates largely, our clear-up numbers largely range between 500 to 600 plus per year. Now that is independent of how many occur, because what your capacity is what it is. So if we have less, and the emergency powers are designed to reduce the numbers so that even as we increase our capacity, which we have done in terms of numbers of detectives, in terms of the technology we apply to investigations and so on, and so that is going up, and how we pursue and capture people. I mean, you'd have noticed that fugitives don't remain at large for very long nowadays. And also, when we talk about clear rate in Jamaica, we mean actually having the person who is charged for the offense or who is wanted for the offense in custody. It's not just about solving the case. We actually have the person in custody to call it a clear-up. If we add to that number the persons where the cases are solved, well, that number goes up. But we have set this high bar for ourselves. We have to have the person in custody. Now, sorry? Well, no, what has happened is if we're going to treat it, the number of detectives, as other countries do, then we would be talking about 4 or 5 times the number of detectives. That would make us of the force way beyond the size and capacity that a country like this could probably maintain. We're talking about 6,000 to 7,000 detectives to deal with the volume of crime. We have to find methods to bring it down, even as we build our capacity upwards. There has to be some happy medium of capacity versus what is going on. And I'm saying that the methods we use is in that light, that all of the things that the Prime Minister described, we put in place to pull this down as we get better at bringing this up. So we are recruiting more officers than we ever have in our history. 1,200 last year, 1,200 plus last year. We're going to hit 1,200 plus again this year. But if you think about it, you're talking about we'd need thousands of just detectives because of these levels. So we have to bring it down. What we should be looking at, or what we can look at, and as journalists, what you can look at, is what expectation of the work of a detective. Some of our academics have put forward and have said a Jamaican detective has many tens of times the number of cases to deal with that somebody abroad has. And of course, if you're getting a new case every day, it's going to impact your efficiency. We're putting in systems in place, a new electronic case management system, or station record management system, or intelligence systems, and all of that come together to make the work to reduce the effort to get similar results. So our detectives can become more efficient, but there's ultimately this point at which, if you have more, you just can't manage it. I'm saying we are increasing what we can do, but what we have has to come down. And my belief is we should use everything at our disposal to bring it down.
If I may just jump in before Minister comes in again to support the Commissioner, because he has given an explanation, Janella, which we have given time and time and time again. But until the question is not asked, then we know that there is still need for explanation. Janella, listeners, people watching us, there has been a high level of disinvestment in our security forces for decades, meaning that the level of investment needed to keep current with the level of crime and demands on our security forces has been very low and instances non-existent. Secondly, we have a very unsophisticated view of national security. We want to have safety, we want to have peace, but we don't see the importance, indeed the preeminence of national security, both the citizen and the political intelligentsia. What we have tried to do as a government is to change the perspective of national security. Citizens tend to focus on crime and miss the bigger picture of national security. Now, when we're talking about national security, it's not just about tackling the criminal. It's about building up, for example, our domain control, how we control our borders. The government has made massive investments in putting being able to very quickly respond. And
I must apologize to my listeners. I must apologize to all my viewing listeners. We're going to cut away from this because we have other things to do. A public state of emergency has declared for some parts of the island. Join us at 11 o'clock on Make We Talk, Jeffrey Tavares YouTube channel, and also on Roots 96.1 FM, where we'll be discussing this. We're breaking away from the live discussion with the Prime Minister of Jamaica, Michael Andrew Holness.
in our security forces. So for the first time in a long